welcome everybody to Clearwater Jazz Holiday Foundation's Young Lions Jazz Master virtual sessions. I see some familiar names, so thanks for those of you who are returning. We are recording these sessions for the purposes of Clearwater Jazz Holiday education and outreach. Today's educator is Alejandro Arenas, and the topic is bass styles, an approach to playing swing, funk, and more. Participants are muted upon entry and during the master class. We appreciate your cooperation to remain muted for the courtesy of others, but if you have a question, you can use the chat feature or the raise your hand feature, and we'll be sure to get to you and get your questions to Alejandro. If you have any feedback for us, or if you would like us to cover a special topic for you and your colleagues, please email those suggestions to info@clearwaterjazz.com. We hope you enjoyed today's session. We have all of our upcoming sessions, including much more from Alejandro, up on clearwaterjazz.com/education. That's the education and outreach page of our website. Alejandro Arenas was born in Colombia, where he started his musical career playing flamenco and classical guitar. He picked up the bass while he attended college in Bogota, where he performed in the salsa and Andean music ensembles as well as the school's orchestra. During his high school years, he performed with different independent bands with styles ranging from salsa, blues, rock, and heavy metal. Upon graduating high school, he moved to Gainesville, Florida. There he worked as a freelance musician while being exposed to different genres such as reggae, jazz, and funk. He earned an AA in music studies from Santa Fe Community College, where he worked unpacking books in the morning, studying during the day, and playing gigs by night. In the midst of this chaotic time in his life, he developed a deep love for jazz, which drove him to learn to play the upright bass. He holds a bachelor's of music in jazz performance and a master of music from the University of South Florida. During his studies at USF, he toured Italy, France, Germany with the Jazz Ensemble One and the Jazz Tet, performing at different jazz festivals. In addition to being an adjunct professor for the Mira program at St. Pete College, Alejandro is very active as a versatile performer, working with artists as diverse as Dick Hyman, Marty Morell, Osamdo Jazz, Jeff Rupert, Whitney James, Antonio Adolfo, David Amron, among many others. He also co-leads the award-winning group La Lucha, who, by the way, has a new single coming out, I believe this Friday, and a new album out soon. La Lucha is a friend of Clearwater Jazz Holiday. They have performed several times at the festival, and Alejandro and his colleagues are active in Clearwater Jazz Holiday education and outreach. Alejandro, welcome to Clearwater Jazz Holiday's Young Lions Jazz Master virtual sessions. The stage is all yours, my friend.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for having me here. And so I wanted to start covering a little bit of ground. There's a lot of stuff to cover. But basically, I just wanted to talk today. This is part of a three-part series of classes, and the first two are more closely related, which are stylistically, or kind of gears towards styles. So today we're going to be covering some swing, funk, and New Orleans grooves, and we're going to see how all of those connect to each other. So kind of to dive in, and we're going to kind of overlap with some stuff, because next week, I think it's at the same time, a week from today, I'm going to be doing one about Brazilian and Latin styles. So today I wanted to cover, let's start with the idea of how to create a bass line and how to really come up with the best pattern or the best feel to play onto something.
Hey, Alejandro, sorry to interrupt. Could
Yes.
you move your mouth closer to the microphone? I think it may come across a little louder.
Yeah. Is that better?
Yeah, it sounds better to me.
Is this better? Okay.
Yeah, it sounds better to me. Everyone on the line, feel free to send a chat if you're not hearing it okay.
So let me turn myself down a little bit. So yeah, basically what I was saying is that we're going to start with looking at the foundation of how to create a good bass line for whatever style you're playing. So I like to think of the concept of the clave. So the clave is a concept that comes from, well, the way we know it comes from Afro-Cuban music. So the clave is a pattern that sounds like this. Right, so what I like about that, and it's not directly related, well, actually, it has more relationship to swing than we think it does. But what I like about that, the name clave, is that it means key. So it's kind of like the key to unlocking the groove, if you will, if you want to think of it that way. And so it doesn't apply in some styles. It's more directly, it's more obvious than others. So since we're going to talk about swing and New Orleans stuff, so let's start with kind of swing. So we all kind of know the idea of swing. You know, we hear walking bass line and we hear kind of, the hi-hat playing, kind of, that's kind of the foundation of swing that we kind of know and understand. But, you know, let's start with a very simple point and thinking of beats 2 and 4, right? So instead of thinking of, it's not a hard rhythm. We're just thinking of beats 2 and 4. So if you think about it, so early on, bass players used to play more like a tuba, root fifth. So kind of they would do more stuff like that instead of walking bass lines. So now if you think of the 2 and 4 pattern, you have the bass playing on beats 1 and 3 and the 2 and 4 in between. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. So it's kind of like call and response in a way, a very, very simple call and response. So now anytime you play something that like a walking bass line or something that kind of swings, keep it in mind feeling 2 and 4. If you're practicing with a metronome, you should probably practice this stuff with beats 2 and 4 instead of just quarter notes. And there's multiple ways of playing this stuff, but that will really help with the feel of what it is that you're trying to do. So kind of going back to the New Orleans tradition, bass players used to play like that, the root and the fifth pattern. And sorry, let me take this off my ear here so I can hear better. Feels weird. Trying to deal with technology. So, okay, 2 and 4 is a good foundation of something that you want to talk about. Now, so let's take the idea of early New Orleans, like I said, root and fifth. Now, what some of the early players did, they did a combination of things. They would play, the root and fifth most of the time, but they could play it with the bow. So it was a lot more, sorry, my dog is freaking out. I have no place to put the dog. So in any case, beats 2 and 4, they would play with the bow sometimes. So it was a softer sound, kind of similar to a tuba. Then sometimes in parts where things kind of got pumped up, they would start playing maybe slap. So they would do like, kind of like something like that. I can't really do slap very well. And then sometimes they, like when they had like rhythmic breaks, they would play slap a lot. And then they would also play just regular pizzicato. Now back in those days, I don't know if you can see my right hand there, a lot of the times the hand came off the fingerboard. So it was kind of part of the slap thing, but when they came back, it didn't really slap. So it was more of a pull, right? So that was kind of the foundation. If you think about it, there's a lot of variety there. So bowing, slap, and plucking all in with the one song. So that's the way bass players kind of created a different contour to a performance. Now later on, people started playing walking bass lines. So now, when you think about it, a lot of early drummers were playing 4 on the floor. And still today with dance music, we always think of 4 on the floor. Doom, 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 doom. That's kind of the driving rhythm. So the 4 on the floor is kind of what the bass player is doing when he's walking, but he's also outlining harmony. So just to take a blues, right, you can start playing in 2. Something simple like that, and then that can set up the 4 for kind of like to take off, to kind of let things move forward a little bit more. So going back to kind of the playing in 2, early on, like I said, it was very similar to the tuba sound. So it was a little bit shorter notes. That's what they used the bow to kind of soften the sound. Now, in more modern times, you know, with guys like in the 50s, like Ray Brown, he started developing a style where he would keep the hand down on the fingerboard a little bit more in order to create longer tones, so he could connect the notes more. So instead of having that, he could play more. So it's a little longer notes, and I know that sound doesn't come through as well. I have it hooked up through a pickup, so it doesn't sound that great coming through. But that was the basic idea. He started kind of being able to play more legato, letting the notes sustain a little bit more. And bass players also became much more sophisticated in terms of what they could play harmonically. And a lot of this started with Jimmy Blanton, bass player with Duke Ellington, at the end of the 30s into the early 40s. He wasn't around for very long, but he was a fantastic player that really took the bass to the next level. And guys like Oscar Pettiford and Ray Brown, and just kind of took it from there and made it more sophisticated. So talking about two, a lot of the times when you're playing with a band, if you're playing like an AABA form, you can start playing in two on the 2A sections and then swing the bridge or walk on the bridge. Then go back to the last A where you play in two again, and then once you go to the solos, you can just kind of walk through. So it all depends. It all depends. There's no, the thing with jazz is that there's certain rules, but it also depends who you're playing with and what your approach, how they approach the music. So if you have somebody that's kind of playing like Oscar Peterson, things are going to be swinging. He's going to be kind of more of that straight ahead approach where you need to really kind of drive the bus and really stay on top of everything. So I'll demonstrate a couple of things here. So one of the things that's interesting. So the way the two beat developed, it started with the New Orleans thing, like I said, just very much like a tuba. Then it got a little bit more involved. So you, instead of just playing root fifth, you can now play thirds and some other more interesting notes. So I have a little example here of a drummer playing in kind of with a two feel. And this is just an example of it. So so if you notice there, I'm playing in two mostly, but I'm also kind of adding a little bit of bounce, and I'm adding a little bit of connecting notes. So so I'm playing with that swing rhythm a little bit. I'm not just playing just on half notes. Please mute your microphones. So that's the idea of playing in two, and then once you start walking, you can go into more of a driving rhythm where you kind of connect things. So just talking about walking bass lines for a minute, and again, we're covering a lot of ground here, but walking bass lines are basically, when you think of walking bass lines, they're really, you're supposed to connect the chords to each other, right? So always try to think linearly when you're playing walking bass lines. So there's a lot of times you hear a lot of people, especially as bass players, become better, technically. There's the tendency to kind of play more, jumping around a little bit more. So not play so linearly, but kind of really just create large intervals and stuff like that. And, that can work in certain situations, but you also have to think of the foundation of the bass, what the bass is creating. So the bass, most musicians look at the bass player as laying the foundation harmonically and rhythmically sometimes, because when walking bass lines is just quarter notes. So we're playing some of the simpler stuff. So, try to create bass lines that kind of connect efficiently with each other. Now, don't use a lot of chromaticism because chromaticism can also obscure the tonality. So you can use a combination of things. So you can use arpeggiated patterns, so right, something like that. You can use a digital pattern or just a pattern that works well, like 1, 2, 3, 5 works well in bass. So that means 1, 2, 3, 5. And if you're going up a fourth, you can go back to the 4 and play that. Stuff like that. You can use portions of scale. You can play scale patterns. Stuff like that. You know, there's a lot of stuff that you can do. Think of a walking bass line almost like you're improvising a solo in quarter notes. Now, you got to be careful with that, because if your approach is to be melodic, that's great. So you want to be... Whoop. Sorry. Can you mute the mic, please? Is everybody hearing that, Steve? Are you getting that?
Yeah, I just had to remove someone.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry, Alejandro.
No, that's all right. I just want to make sure it wasn't like something that was on my equipment or something. So in any case, so if you take your walking bass line, so that you want to create, like I was talking about, connecting the chords a little bit more efficiently, not be too far departed from that stuff. So for example, I'm going to take this actually applies very well to when you're playing without a comping instrument or without an instrument that's playing the chords with you. I think you have to simplify your bass lines a little bit. You got to think of the listener, see if they know the song that you're playing. So you need to outline the chords a little bit better. A good example of that is Ray Brown on an album called Way Out West with Sonny Rollins. Sonny Rollins, like a tenor player, he liked to play trios with just bass players and drummers, because he had freedom harmonically. He wasn't bound by a chord being played by, with these specific notes that you need to adhere to. But it's not like he was playing out. He was playing his idea, and he had it creates counterpoint. It creates two melodies that are going together. So Ray Brown was just the master of the walking bass line, and he was really able to do very creative walking bass lines, but also outline the harmony really well and with a great feel. So that's really what you should strive to do with walking bass lines. So it's just that quarter note needs to be consistent more than anything. It needs to be driving, and it's to really be, if you're behind the beat a little bit, that's okay, but it needs to be consistently behind the beat. It can't fluctuate, and there's a lot of theories about, what it should or should not be. And that's why musicians play with a bunch of different people, because sometimes you're compatible with certain musicians, sometimes you're not, as much as you want to find that ground. So in any case, to demonstrate, walking bass line, it's really, that could be a whole class, multitude of classes for a while, just to create, think of the harmony of what you're going to play and all that stuff, but really stick to linear patterns if you can. So even if you do a big jump, I kind of jumped up a little bit and then I just kind of walked down. So it's walking, it needs to be walking. It's not a skipping bass line. That's why it's called walking. It needs to be smooth. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the New Orleans stuff and the clave thing that I mentioned earlier. So kind of one of the more common patterns, I know I started talking about New Orleans and kind of how much simpler the bass lines were, but that's a tradition that lives on. And as the bass becomes a more important instrument, or a more prominent instrument in a lot of the different stuff, it has liberated certain things that the bass can do. Now, a lot of this goes back to the tradition. So I'm going to play a quick pattern that is called the second line. So the second, something to keep in mind is that a lot of rhythms that we play or that we base our playing on are really derived from percussion. So some of those rhythms didn't originate on the bass, or some of these rhythms didn't originally have a bass on them. So we kind of have to be familiar with the underlying rhythm. Like I said, the clave, you know, like it's not always going to be called a clave, but if you were here at the beginning, that's basically the idea. You find what the key is to the groove. So like I said, for swing, you can think of 2 and 4. You know, there's more ways to think about it, like I said. But now for this, let's. I'm gonna play the drum track really quick for you guys, so you can notice something here. Right, so the rhythm on that is pretty much, it's like a march, right? From second line, that's where the name comes from. There was the second line in the march in New Orleans. Without getting too deep into that, the drums kind of have a certain swing to them. The rhythm sounds more involved in a sense than what you would play with a walking bass line in terms of drums. That was kind of more free, and you know, it's not a drum masterclass, so I'm not going to get into that. But right, there's an underlying rhythm here, and it's actually kind of related to what some people call the Brazilian clave. So the Brazilian clave is very similar. So remember at the beginning of the class, I mentioned the 3-2 clave, or just the clave. I didn't mention 3-2, but 3-2 is right. So basically, you're thinking of 2 bars. The first bar has 3 notes. Right, and actually the middle note on that is a syncopated note. So remember, syncopated means accenting a weak beat, and that's where the flavor of a lot of this stuff comes from. So, you know, ba, ba, ba. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Da, 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 ba, ba. So I started clapping quarter notes there for a second. I need to work on my coordination. But the point being, the middle note on that first pattern is syncopated. It's off. It's on the end of 2. Now, the second bar is actually beats 2 and 3, depending how you're thinking of this. If you're thinking this is the quarter note, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, then you work with that, and there's the 2 middle notes. So da, 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 ka, ka, da, 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 da. Now, you can invert that pattern and play 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Right? So all I'm doing is the same pattern, but the 2 side is starting first. And that's kind of what's going on with this, but this is actually a little bit more syncopated because it's playing ka, 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 ka. Da, da. So I'm clapping beat 1. So listen to it again. Right, so it has that underlying clave. Now, here's the interesting thing. The bass, what does the bass play on this? Well, more commonly, you can actually play just half notes or short quarter notes on beats 1 and 3, for example. Right, that sounds kind of a little old school. Not super swingy, but it works. It actually kind of works by contrast because the bass is not syncopated, so it's kind of really laying the foundation while the drums have all the dance on top of that. But then the bass can actually play the 3 side of the clave as a pattern. Right, so tak, tak, tak. And it actually works fine over the 2 side. So for example, I'm just going to play the 3. Right, so that's your basic idea of. I was just playing the 3 side of the clave. Ta 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 ta. just repeating it. Now, if I want to make it a little bit more interesting, I can take the 2 side of the clave and kind of play it as well. So now, if I just play the straight 2 side of the clave, it kind of sounds not super. It's I don't know. It sounds, you can play part of it, but the idea is to use some of the syncopation too, like I was doing. Now, what I'm trying to do there is really think of that underlying rhythm. Ta 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 ta. Right, so that things match with that or play against it. That's kind of the cool thing about this. Now, here's another example of also kind of a second line-ish type of beat, but it's a 3-2 clave and it feels straighter, it's not a swung. So So that one has a straight 3-2 clave. The other one, the first side of it was more geared towards the Brazilian, like more related to the Brazilian thing, which you've heard in bossa nova sometimes. This one more was closer to the Afro-Cuban clave, if you will, or son clave, which is actually what it's called. The pattern, you know, it kind of has a similar feel, but it's a little bit different. So, but the bass can still do the same thing. Play the 3, actually 3-3, or you can just play 3-2. Right. That, you notice, it's a little bit harder. It's a faster tempo, but this to me is kind of more closely related to funk, what we understand as funk today. Now, this is kind of where I wanted to go with this, because the thing is that all of these rhythms are very much connected. That's why I bunched them into this one class, because they all kind of have the same origin, but they feel very different when you play them. So I'm going to play a little funk thing at the end. Not at the end, but right now here. So before I play with it, right, you kind of see the kind of how those last 3 are, or the last 2 at least that I played are fairly close in sound. I mean, at least to my ear, they feel pretty funky. Both of them feel pretty funky, but I would approach both of them a little bit different, because again, and the 3-2 clave on the first rhythm was a little bit more obvious. The last one is more of what we know. I would more closely relate that to like a James Brown type of funk than really a New Orleans based thing. But like I said, it also comes from the same place. That influence really permeated, and regionally, if you go to different places, some of these rhythms just change a little bit. And like I said, I'll cover a little bit more from the Latin American perspective next week once we do the Brazilian and the Latin stuff, because it all comes from Africa, basically. So this last one, so I wanted to talk about funk a little bit. When you think of funk, really your most important beat initially is just beat 1. A beat 1 needs to be established. So you're thinking more of a 16-note subdivision when you're playing. But that beat 1 is really what grounds everything, you know. James Brown was all about that. And after that, you can play with syncopation. So I get syncopation is kind of taking whatever in that subdivision of the beat and catching stuff like that, catching some of those notes, so especially syncopated notes. So for example, I'll try to play a little bit with this. See, so notice how he plays beat one, kind of really puts an emphasis opening the hi-hat. So I'll play a little bit with it, start trying to emphasize that one. Right, so that's kind of what grounds it all, having that big one, and it's when you first listen to it, it's not as closely related to what we would think a swing as a walking bass line or anything like that, but it is. I mean, a lot of these rhythms, that's why I started with New Orleans. I kind of ended with a little bit of New Orleans and the funk, because it's all very closely related as far as the origin of where that goes. Really, the best way, kind of I know, like I said, it's a lot of ground to cover, and we're getting towards the end here. But any rhythm, any style that you're trying to play, try to find what that foundational rhythm is. Whether it's a simple one or whether it's something more involved. Just try to find what it is. Use your ears and try to see what it is. Try to if it's something from a different country, try to find recordings. I mean, we live in an era where we have so much access to music, recorded music, and internationally recorded music, that it's fantastic. Because back in the day, if you wanted to go study Cuban music, well, you had to go to Cuba, and I mean, that's still probably your best option to really, really learn a style, but there's a lot that you can do by listening, really kind of seeing how somebody approaches. That's how I learned to play a lot of these styles. Really was, I grew up in Colombia, like Steve mentioned in my bio, and really, I didn't really play any jazz. I didn't really know a lot of this stuff back then, but I listened to some of it, and then later I really immersed myself into the music and really try to see what the feel was, what it was that spoke to me from that music, and what it is that I'm supposed to play with or against. Because a lot of these rhythms are supposed to kind of interlock in a way, and it's not always in a tight way either. Sometimes that looseness is kind of it's what makes the music special. You can listen to a band like Tower of Power, which is incredibly tight, super, super tight. And then you can listen to some of the more New Orleans oriented funk stuff, and it's looser, it's greasier, as if you want to think about it that way. But they both feel awesome. They both feel really good. So really listen as much as you can, and feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Facebook, on social media. My email is talkingbass@gmail.com. If you want suggestions with recordings to listen to, or kind of dig in a little bit more into this stuff, like I said, it's hard to cover this stuff without getting deep into it in the amount of time that we have. But it's, what I want to put in your ears is kind of the idea of how to approach playing a rhythm. So like I said, always look back to see what it is, the foundational rhythm of that. Like I said, the bass may not always play that. The bass, a lot of these is percussion, or rhythms that are percussion based, and you don't have to learn to play them on percussion, but really understanding what they sound like and what they feel like, and more specifically, then what the role of the bass is within that. And next week, like I said, I'll expand a little bit more on that, because in some Latin American and Brazilian music, again, those were also styles where the bass was not an instrument that was part of the origin of it. So it'll be a little bit more apparent in how the variations work, even though that clave is going to be all over the place. It's going to be present in all of those styles. But if you notice, a lot of the commonalities in this are syncopation. So really being able to feel those offbeats, those accenting those odd beats that are not quite straight. A lot of rock music, that's why it feels grounded and kind of strong, because a lot of it is really downbeat based. It's not really, I mean, there's bands obviously that's kind of a generalization, but it's very much kind of downbeats a lot of the time. And a lot of funk music, a lot of R&B, soul, jazz has a lot of syncopation. And that's the beauty of jazz too, that you can play any of those styles within jazz. Like I said, today I just used a kind of I never went through a full chord progression, but just that I just played a blues, and that blues can be played in so many different styles, and that's why it's so prevalent. And even though it's 3 chords at its most basic form, it still works after all these years. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. Steve, did you get any questions or anything?
I have a couple for you, Alejandro. What was
Yes.
the technology you were using for the drum tracks? Do you use that
Oh,
regularly with your own practice?
yes, great question. Thank you, Steve. I actually use an app called Drum Genius. And it's kind of funny because it has like the cover of it is like a green guy like with glasses. So if you look at it on the App Store, it's a fantastic app. It has, I think you buy the full version, it has like 400 loops. And it's really cool because they're actually recorded from real drummers and they're looped. So what I did was actually I just recorded a few bars of that loop and I put them on my iPad because it was a little bit easier to trigger. But you can do that. They have odd meters. They have a lot of different styles. They have a lot of. It's just one of the most amazing apps for this type of stuff. You can slow things down. You can speed them up. So you can really, and some of the rhythms actually have like claves in them. So like when you play this one I was playing the Brazilian one, the 2/3 Brazilian based one. You can turn on the clave on the app itself, and it'll play like the Brazilian clave that it's based on. So if you can't hear it, they kind of put it there like, hey, this is kind of what this rhythm is based around. There's also an app called iReal Pro, which is basically like a play along. It's just chord changes. It looks, when you open it, it just looks like a blank lead sheet, or no lead sheet even, because there's no melodies, but it's just chord. You can just see the structure of the song with chords, but it will play them back for you. So, and you can change styles and all that stuff. And the styles are not as good, they're basically computer-based styles, but they're still helpful. If you're practicing soloing or walking bass lines or anything like that, that's a really good way to learn to navigate chord changes and stuff like that. So I thought about using that one, but since we were talking about more authentic styles, this app was a lot better for that. Like one of the things that I had here, let's see. Oh, I didn't play this, the jazz waltz, because I wanted to mention really quick when you play in 3. Because a lot of bass players tend to want to walk in 3, like they would approach, but they would approach a 4/4 time, like a swing beat, and that's fine, but I've had a few people that have told me they prefer bass players not to walk in 3 because, once they hear the walking bass line, they start thinking in 4. So it can get a little tricky. Again, it's a preference thing, and of course, as bass players, we need to practice to play in 3, to walk in 3, if that's what we have to do. But really, you can be more loose with it. I'll do a quick demonstration with this. It's be short, but it's a jazz waltz. Right, so I'm kind of more loose. I'm kind of accenting some of the stuff, and this particular loop is from Jimmy Cobb playing All Blues and Kind of Blue, the Miles Davis album. So very famous thing in 3. And again, you still kind of have that underlying rhythm, but you're trying to be a little bit more loose with it and make it feel like it's in 3. That's the other thing. You can get fancy and try to emphasize 4 against 3 and do all that stuff. That's cool if the song gets there. So that's the last thing I wanted to really emphasize. When you're playing with people, just make sure you listen across. You may have the best licks, the best stuff that you've been working on, some crazy bass lines that are, just the hippest thing, but if they don't fit in the musical situation that you're in, they're not worth anything. Or if you're not able to actually use what you're supposed to use in those situations, then you're not going to be that useful as a bass player. No, and I'm not saying you should develop your own voice and you should do your own thing, but it depends on the gig. So be able to realize what the gig is and what the gig calls for, and always communicate with the band leaders. Sometimes people like to take things out, but they want you to stay in so that their outness makes more or makes less sense in a way, or they're kind of, or it's more obvious. Sometimes people like you to go explore with them. So it depends. That's why communication in any aspect of life is key. And especially when you're playing improvised music or music that has a lot of improvisation in it. Well, I think we are past the point of no return.
Yeah, Alejandro,
So
we're so happy that you're part of this series of sessions that we're doing. We enjoyed having all of La Lucha with us to kick things off, and now each of you are doing your own series of sessions, which I think is really cool. You're going to be back with us on May 26th for
that's
another
right. Yeah, a
bass,
week from today, right?
yeah, bass styles, Brazilian and Latin grooves, and then back on June 2nd with a topic called bass sounds, from pickups and amps to technique and more. There's also been some inquiries, Alejandro, maybe something to think about, some electric bass players that we have,
Yes.
and
Yes.
maybe we can do some sessions for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's something I wanted to try to get to today, and how to kind of approach playing some of these styles on electric bass. Just a quick answer to that is, I know there's a couple of electric players do that because I know I'm playing upright here, and there's a little bit of a natural sound of that comes out of that. So when you play an electric, you don't get that natural bounce, you don't get that response from the body, so you don't get kind of that deep sound. But what I try to do when I play this on electric is really to approach it like I would be playing an upright bass, in the sense of my right hand position. Obviously if I dig in the way I do on an upright, I'm gonna kind of choke the strings on an electric, but it is the idea of that kind of that driving rhythm, and be aware that the volume is also a factor. On upright you kind of have to dig in. On electric, because of the volume, you don't have to. If some people have a very light touch, so the notes should feel even throughout, and they should be, if you do look, those kind of like the little skip, those really shouldn't be louder than, and to you guys it may actually sound a little bit louder because of the way my bass is amplified right now, or I have the pickup into this, so that stuff kind of gets more accentuated. But that stuff should be consistent throughout. The way you don't have to emulate the sound of an upright bass. That's very difficult to do with an electric, but you can emulate the feel of the walking bass line, which is that driving even rhythm. And like that's kind of the short answer for that. So that I
Yeah,
won't
no, I
talk for another
appreciate it,
30 minutes.
Alejandro. So maybe we can do some maybe do envision some classes that are specific for electric bass. For those of you that have been with us, we've got a full packed schedule through almost the end of June now, with more being added often. We've got Dr. Pete Carney, who's the director of jazz studies at the State College of Florida, joining us tomorrow at 4:30 on a topic called Practicing Safer at Home, Advanced Improvisation with Simple Tech. And although Pete is a sax player, He's welcoming all instruments to this session. I think it will be a great one. And then we have Frank Williams back with us with Tyler Wertman on Thursday for another basic trombone fundamental class, tonguing and articulation. So please visit us at clearwaterjazz.com/education for all upcoming sessions. They are all free. They are all brought to you by Clearwater Jazz Holiday Foundation and our partners. Big thank you to Al Downing Tampa Bay Jazz Association and also our good friends at the Pinellas Realtor Organization and Central Pasco Association of Realtors for your support, helping expand these. Alejandro, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for everything, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Thank you. And if anybody that's here, like I said, feel free to reach out. I'm on social media or, talkingbase@gmail.com. And please stay in touch. And if you have any questions for any future, any ideas for any future master classes, please do tell Steve or myself.
Yep. You can send any suggestions to info@clearwaterjazz.com. All right. Stay safe, everybody. Be well, and we'll see you back tomorrow. Take care, Alejandro.
Take care, guys.